The early morning sun had barely crested over the rolling fields when I heard that now familiar roar in the distance. The deep, aggressive hum of a silver SUV tearing through the quiet of my farmland. The sound made my stomach knot. I didn't even have to look anymore to know who it was. Karen Whitmore, self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman who had made it her personal mission to remind me that, in her words, the rules of the neighborhood apply to everyone, even the ones who pretend to live outside it. The thing is, I didn't live in her neighborhood. My grandfather's 10-acre farm was a few hundred yards beyond the HOA's official boundary. But ever since the suburban development expanded outward, Karen had decided that her jurisdiction now included my land. She had this way of talking, like she was reciting commandments written on stone. And for months, she'd been driving through my property, cutting across the edge of my wheat field to shave 2 minutes off her morning route. It started small, tire marks through the soft soil, flattened patches of wheat. I thought it was just some careless driver taking a shortcut. But then I caught her one morning, right as her SUV plowed through the field, throwing up a storm of dirt and debris. I stepped out with a wave, trying to be polite. "Ma'am, this is private property," I said, my voice even. She rolled her window down, wearing that smug little smirk that could sour milk. "Private property?" she said mockingly. "This entire road is part of the community's access. You can't just block it." "There is no community road here," I said firmly. "This land's been in my family since 1948. I've got the title, the survey, everything." Karen laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Rusty, my dog, growl from behind me. "Well," she said with a shrug, "maybe your paperwork's out of date. You should talk to the HOA board. We can make this easy." She revved the engine and drove off, leaving behind a trail of dust that stung my eyes. I stood there for a long moment, fists clenched, trying not to lose my temper. That was the beginning of what I started calling the War of the Field. Every few days she'd do it again, sometimes in the morning, sometimes at night. Once she even did it when it was raining, and her tires ripped deep scars into the wet soil. Each time I called the county sheriff's office. Each time the deputy came, took photos, nodded sympathetically, and then said, "We'll talk to her." But nothing ever changed. Why? Because Karen had connections. Her husband was some mid-level attorney in town, and half the HOA board owed her favors. In a way, she was untouchable. One afternoon, I caught her taking pictures of my barn. "What are you doing?" I demanded, walking toward her. "Documenting," she said without even glancing up from her phone. "Your fence violates HOA Code Section 13B, Property Appearance Standards." I blinked. "You can't enforce HOA rules here. This isn't your jurisdiction," she just smiled. "We'll see about that." That was the last straw. I wasn't the kind of man to start trouble, but I also wasn't going to sit by while someone destroyed my land and laughed about it. So I decided if the system wouldn't stop her, nature would. That night, after the sun dipped below the horizon and the chorus of crickets began, I walked out into the field with a shovel, a flashlight, and Rusty trotting at my heels. There was a natural low spot right where her tires always hit. It had good drainage, soft clay, and the perfect conditions for what I had in mind. I dug until my shoulders ached, widening and deepening the spot until it was a shallow basin, about 4 feet across and nearly 3 feet deep. I lined the bottom with clay soil from the creek bed, mixed it with water until it was thick enough to suck the boots off your feet, then covered it with a thin layer of dry dirt to disguise it. It looked harmless, innocent even, like any other patch of field. But I knew better. Over the next 2 days, I kept it soaked using my irrigation pump. Each night, I'd sneak out to make sure it stayed perfect, just the right mix of soft and sticky. When I finished, I leaned on my shovel, sweat dripping from my chin, and muttered, "You want to keep running through my crops, Karen? Let's see how your fancy SUV handles this." Rusty wagged his tail like he understood. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the road. The air was cool still, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. Then I heard it, the low rumble of an engine. Karen's SUV came into view, speeding toward the same spot as always. I almost felt bad for what was about to happen. Almost. She didn't even slow down. The car hit the patch, and for a split second it looked like she might power through. But then the front tires sank, hard. The whole SUV lurched forward, the back end lifting slightly before slamming back down with a crunch. Mud exploded outward, coating the sides of her vehicle. The engine revved, tires spun, but the more she tried to move, the deeper it sank. I stood up, set my coffee cup down, and started walking toward her. Through the windshield, I could see her flailing her arms, yelling into her phone. Her window rolled down, and she screamed, "You did this! You sabotaged me!" I stopped a few feet away, camera in hand, and smiled. "Morning, Karen," I said calmly. "Looks like you found the soft spot." "This is illegal," she shrieked, mud flying off her tires. "You'll be sued for damages." I gestured to the no trespassing sign just a few yards away. "Actually, you've been driving through my private property for weeks. I've got footage, reports, and witnesses. You're trespassing." "Don't you lecture me about property rights," she snapped. "I'm on the HOA board. This road is community access." "Not anymore," I said, taking a photo of her stuck SUV. "And this," I pointed to the deep ruts and splattered mud, "is evidence. So maybe call your lawyer before you call anyone else." Karen tried to open her door, but sank up to her ankles in mud the moment she stepped out. Her expensive suede boots were instantly ruined. She let out a shrill scream of frustration, nearly slipping as she tried to get back in the car. Rusty barked from behind me, tail wagging like this was the best entertainment of his life. I turned to him and said softly, "Well, buddy, looks like justice finally got her hands dirty." Karen shouted something about legal consequences and property damage, but her words didn't carry much weight covered in mud up to her knees. I lifted my phone and hit record. "Say hi to the camera, Karen. This'll go nicely with the other videos I've got of you trespassing. You've ignored warnings, crossed signs, and damaged property. I think the sheriff's office is going to want to see this." Her expression shifted from rage to panic. "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I would," I said with a grin. "And I will." As I walked away, her SUV still spinning helplessly behind me, I couldn't help but feel that rare, quiet satisfaction that comes from standing your ground the right way. For months, I'd been patient, civil, reasonable, but now the field had spoken for itself. That morning, as I poured myself another cup of coffee on the porch, the distant sound of her engine struggling against the mud faded into silence. The only sound left was the rustle of wheat in the wind and Rusty's soft, contented growl. Karen's screams echoed across the field, a mix of anger and humiliation. By the time she realized she wasn't getting out anytime soon, her pristine SUV was almost buried up to the wheel arches. Mud oozed up around her ankles, and her designer shoes were ruined. I called the sheriff, not to report her, but to let them handle the inevitable scene. When Deputy Ellis arrived 15 minutes later, he couldn't help but smirk at the sight. "She drove through again, didn't she?" he asked, adjusting his hat. "Yup," I replied. "Third time this week." Karen waved frantically, covered in dirt. "Officer! Arrest him! He made this trap." Ellis scratched his chin. "Ma'am, you've been warned multiple times about trespassing. This here's private land. If you hadn't ignored the signs, you wouldn't be in this mess." Her jaw dropped. "You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of the law," he said, pulling out his notebook. "Now we'll need a tow for your car. You're also getting fined for property damage and trespassing." Again. Karen shrieked as they pulled her car free hours later. The once shiny SUV now looked like it had been through a war. She refused to look at me as she left, mud dripping from the undercarriage. But word spreads fast in small towns. By evening, every neighbor knew about the HOA queen stuck in the farmer's trap. Someone even made a meme out of it. For once, the laughter wasn't at my expense. A week later, the fields were quiet again. No tire tracks, no shouting, no HOA inspections. Just the peaceful sound of wind moving through the wheat. One day, an unfamiliar car pulled up to my gate. It wasn't Karen. It was a man in a crisp suit. He introduced himself as the new HOA president. "Mr. Collins," he said politely, "I wanted to apologize for what happened. Mrs. Whitaker's actions were unacceptable. She's been removed from her position." I raised an eyebrow. "Removed? He nodded. Her behavior reflected poorly on the association. We're revising our policies. I'd like to personally assure you, your property will be respected moving forward. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Appreciate that, I said, shaking his hand. Maybe the next time HOA folks drive by, they'll stick to the road. He chuckled nervously. I believe they will. As his car disappeared down the road, I turned back toward the field, now fully healed, green and alive again. Rusty ran ahead, barking at the horizon.